So the Xbox Series X apparently runs hot, but is this something we should be worrying about? What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. So the word going around the internet right now, which is the big thing with the Xbox Series X, is that some journalists and influencers have been saying that the console itself is running hot, and this is causing craze and worry amongst a lot of people. So let's take a look at this and dive into whether this is something that we need to worry about, or if this just is the normal function of a console, of pretty much just a PC and how PCs function. So this article here is from videogamechronicles.com saying journalists say Xbox Series X can get hot like a fireplace. And some of the quotes going around, particularly from this Giant Bomb podcast talking about the Xbox Series X. It is Jeff Bakalar who is talking about his pre-release console and saying that it runs hot. He actually takes out the SSD, says that the SSD is hot, and talks about how the console, even in standby mode, is emitting heat and hot to the touch. So let's just take a quick look at what he's saying.
Ooh, it's on fire! Super hot! Why is it so hot? Yeah, it's still so it's a terabyte of storage, which is pretty wild. But here's the thing.
So that doesn't come with it though. That's like a separate accessory,
No,
right?
this is
That's
like
the $200 thing.
$220.
Yeah.
So here's what's crazy, right? This thing.
Yeah.
This was just plugged in standby mode behind me.
Oh
And
yeah.
guys.
Yeah.
The entire thing is a little toasty.
Now,
and-
again, this is pre-release hardware,
Yeah,
to be fair. But
totally.
you know,
And-
All right, so there you have it. You see that he takes out that 1 terabyte SSD. You see that he can kind of physically feel that it's actually hot on his hand, and then goes on to say that the console itself is toasty even when it's in standby mode. Now, why is this causing such a stir around the internet, you may ask? And there is pretty much, I mean, I've come up with 2 reasons, but I would say the main reason is that fear of the red ring of death from the Xbox 360, and then the internet just being the internet and snowballing it into something much bigger than it is. Let's take a look at what actually happened to the Xbox 360. This is an interview from 2008, talking to somebody who actually worked on the Xbox 360, and they go over how they built the 360 with that design, and they had to fit all the components into it. And basically, the reason why the red ring of death in the first models of the Xbox 360 was so prevalent was because there was excessive heat on the motherboard, but it was because the motherboard was malleable and not in a good position, and it was bending. So let's read the opinion here that he said as to why the red ring of death was occurring on the Xbox 360. In your opinion, what do you think the main cause of the red ring of death failure have been? The red ring of death is caused by anything that fails in the digital backbone on the motherboard, also known as a core digital error, CPU, GPU, memory, etc. Bad parts, incompatible parts, timing problems, bad manufacturing problems like solder joints, misapplied heatsinks and thermal interface material, missing parts, broken parts, parts of the wrong value, missed test coverage. Any one or more on any chip or many other discrete components would cause this. And many of the failures were obviously infant mortality, where they would work when they would leave the factory and fail early in use. The main design flaw was the excessive heat on the GPU, warping the motherboard around it. This would stress the solder joints on the GPU, and any bad joints would then fail early in the life. The heat wasn't the actual main issue with the Xbox 360. Yes, the heat caused the motherboard to warp, but because of design, because the motherboard wasn't reinforced, it would bend and then things would disconnect, and then you get the red ring of death, and that was the main issue. Now let's take a look at the Xbox Series X and how it is built. So if we take a look here, it has this massive fan at the top. So it's gonna emit the heat, the hot air from the bottom up, and shoot the hot air out of the top of the console. So you should be feeling hot air no matter what coming out of the top of the console. And if you're not feeling hot air coming out of the top of the console, then your system is not doing what it's supposed to do. The fact that hot air is actually coming out and that the sides potentially may get a little toasty means that the system is actually working in the way that it is designed to work. It's actually a good thing. And if you look here with the motherboard, there is a metal plate that is going to be reinforcing that metal board so that it can't really bend or move, or nothing will really be able to detach from it, which is definitely a good thing. So the fact that people are worrying about the red ring of death, I think right now is absolutely absurd, in the fact that it is a console. Like, if you look at the design of the console, yes, it's relatively thick, but in general, for the amount of power in that thing, pretty good. It's pretty small for what it has. And you're going to feel heat on the sides. You're going to feel heat everywhere on the console just because of how compact it is. But it's not, doesn't mean that it's going to overheat and turn off. There's a big difference between the console having heat, and then a massive difference between that and a console having too much heat where it just overheats and turns off and cannot function, or eventually fails and it can't work anymore at all. Now, I'll be completely honest, with my Xbox One X, I have the Xbox Project Scorpio edition, and that thing gets hot. That thing, the fans ramp up and you can feel that hot air coming out. And I've had issues with it overheating and turning off only while playing NBA 2K. It's the weirdest thing ever. And I did a little bit of research on it. I don't know anyone else who's watching this video has had this issue, but apparently it was because they didn't do a good job at applying the thermal paste on the SoC on the first launch of the Xbox One X. And I took apart my Xbox One X, I placed the thermal paste, and now I've had zero issues. It wasn't a design flaw really. It wasn't because it wasn't getting rid of the heat properly. It was literally just because they put cheap thermal paste on the SoC and didn't apply it properly for the Project Scorpio editions of the Xbox One X. Even though, I mean, that's still something that shouldn't happen when they release a console. The design and everything of the One X was not the issue. And I highly doubt that the design of the Xbox Series X is going to be a big issue and that we're going to see a large failure rate with the Xbox Series X. And you can also bet that if there were significant problems with the Xbox Series X, they would have already tested it out before sending it to a bunch of journalists to use. And I mean, now that we're talking about it as it being hot, it's getting twisted into something that it really isn't, and that I don't think anyone should be that worried about going into the next generation. So just to further this, we have Jez here, Jez Corden, who is on with Windows Central, and on a podcast talked about the heat of the Xbox Series X and how people are now taking what he said out of context and blowing it out of proportion, tweeting, Microsoft tests Xbox Series X heat thresholds by putting them into special ovens where they can turn up ambient temperatures, etc. Console isn't going to have any cooling problems a la Red Ring of Death, just more fanboy, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Then he goes on to say, people are using something I said on the podcast clipped and out of context where I said it was enough heat to warm up a room, except I go on to say that's like a high-end PC, Xbox One X, PS4 Pro, etc. Electronics make rooms warm unless you have AC. But yeah, this just gives you more context of what's really going on. I mean, if you have a computer, if you have any sort of high-powered electronics in your house, turn it on, start putting some processes through it, it's gonna get hot. You're gonna feel hot air coming out. It's just normal. But I would definitely suggest, potentially, if you're getting an Xbox Series X, maybe get that warranty with it just in case there is issues that come up. There are always issues with the launch of consoles at the beginning of its life cycle. There are always failures. There's always some that don't make it out, but I don't think that the Red Ring of Death or the heat is going to cause a mass failure of the Xbox Series X. I could be completely wrong. They could get released and everything could just go to shit. I have no idea. But from what I'm reading and from what I am seeing based off of the heat that they're saying and based off of why the Xbox 360 failed, I don't have too many worries about that. Let me know what you guys think about this in the comments below. Do you think there should be some worry about the Xbox Series X heat? Do you think that it's going to have a failure rate like the Red Ring of Death with the Xbox 360? Or do you think this is all just being twisted and blown out of proportion? I would love to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that thumbs up button. Make sure to stay tuned for more videos covering the next generation of consoles, the Xbox Series X and the PlayStation 5, as well as me getting my hands on the Series X and PS5 on day one and doing a bunch of videos. If you can't tell, I'm very excited for it. Thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.